Good evening. Again, I'm coming to you from my home on March 5th. And again, this is my daily comment on the Ukrainian Russian war. Again, the battlefield seems to be static, which is a bad thing for Russia. Um, and it may be that Russia's announced gains are not actually taking place. In fact, I read a Reuters article today saying that Kherson is not fallen to the Russians, that they're still fighting in Kherson, so that the one city they were able to take with a week of fierce fighting, it may not be a Russian gain after all. And we'll see as the days go on. The northern sector is, of course, static. That 40-mile convoy going nowhere, it seems to be a real liability for the Russians. I saw a piece on Facebook today showing evidently or showing some 22 Russian tanks surrendering to the Ukrainians. That is significant, and that 40-mile convoy just seems to be an absolute military absurdity. But okay, Russians have been known to do that. They massed at the free land so that the French cannon could wipe their infantry ranks out. So it could happen again. I think the 40-mile convoy will be defeated. Kharkiv is holding out. Mariupol is holding out, so that the Russians are having a very bad time at it. Yes, there are significant Ukrainian casualties, but Russian casualties surpass that easily. Any invading force has to have a 5-to-1 advantage to do anything, and the losses that they would suffer in taking strong entrenched defensive positions would indicate that the Russians are suffering much more than the Ukrainians. And again, the Russians have a 200,000 man effective force, which doesn't seem to be enough to take a nation of 44 million people. But so that the situation militarily looks fairly dire for the Russian invasion force, and may give the Ukrainians significant hope. Uh, so I like to move away from the battlefield, though, to talk about the kind of philosophical underpinnings of this invasion. And I think back to the Platonic dialogues on power and Thucydides' Peloponnesian War. Again, if you look at Plato's the work on the Republic, you have Sophists, relativist thinkers on power, such as Thrasymachus and Callicles, who argue that power might makes right. Uh, I don't. Obviously, we don't want to accept that, but there are some strong arguments in favor of it. Nonetheless, I think in this case, certainly the Ukrainian war, I think the stiff defense of their homeland by the Ukrainians give a strong counterpoint to that argument. So, where Thrasymachus in the first book of the Republic argues for the idea that might makes right, I would turn to the Melian Dialogues of Thucydides to examine that argument a little deeper. And I would also look at Herodotus' histories, particularly his explanation of why the Greeks were able to defeat the much larger Persian Empire. And so let's just take a look at those. Uh, The Melian Dialogues are very interesting because this is during the Peloponnesian War, and the island Republic of Melos is invaded by the Athenians. The Athenians basically say either you join us in this war or you are doomed. Your cities will be destroyed. Your men will be killed. Your children and women will be sold into slavery. Um, and we do this because we can. The gods have given us the power to do this, therefore we can. The Melians respond by saying, we don't want to fight anyone, we want to stay neutral. The Athenians basically say, you can't. Thucydides, who was an Athenian general, looked at this dialogue, if you want to call it that, and he criticized it for the outright assertion of naked power. He was actually looking at the Melian Dialogues from a standpoint of an anti-sophist argument. That is, he was countering the arguments made earlier by Thrasymmachus, who said that power that might makes right. Thucydides criticized this attempt by the Athenians to exert a military might to sway a people in ways that were amoral or immoral. I would tend to agree with that. There's also the argument made by Herodotus in his history of the Persian Wars, where he was asking why the Persians were not able to defeat the Greeks. The Greeks, a much smaller set of contentious republics or city-states, were able to defeat a much larger empire. And ultimately, the argument that Herodotus makes is that the Greeks were free people defending their homeland and their freedom against essentially an invading army of slaves. That is, those people who invaded had no say in what they were doing, while the Greeks, the cities of Athens, Sparta, of course, being the most important, Corinth, and Thespis and other city-states were free states, constitutionally free states that were able to decide on their fate, and therefore they had all decided to be there and to fight against the Persians, while the Persian military was essentially ordered to be there by the Persian emperor without any kind of say or approval of their military and political actions. That is a very important factor to take into account today. The Russian military forces don't seem to even know why they're there, much less have approved of the invasion of the Ukraine. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, have committed to a strong defense of their national homeland, and therefore they've all decided to be there. And this kind of parallels the Persian Wars of Herodotus, and I would say that it bodes ill for the Russian invasion. In addition to that, I would say that the idea that people a conscript force, I mean, they're basically two conscript forces facing each other, can defend is quite viable. The Ukrainians are on the defensive, therefore they are in the stronger ground. They are likely to inflict much heavier casualties than the Russians are able to inflict on them. Given the fact that the Russians have not attained air superiority, much less air supremacy, I would think that the Ukrainian defenses will be stiff and will not be overcome unless Russia commits a massive percentage of their military forces. I don't think Russia's military invasion will go well. In the long term, Putin will lose. I think he's already lost diplomatically. You have a stiffening of European resolve to face the threat. You have increased unity by NATO. You have perhaps the one thing that Putin wanted to avoid, a Europe that is able to defend itself by itself. And this is significant. Um, so I think Putin has lost in the long term, and he may actually lose in the short term because taking cities does not necessarily mean you will hold them. And given the scarcity of Russian forces, that is 200,000, to dominate a nation of 44 million, I think that's absurd. So that Putin will face increasing obstacles as the days go on.